The title for this panel session is The Sharia Debate, Moving from Halal to Tayyib. And as Umer Shaykh mentioned earlier, Tayyib is what's known as wholesome. A good example would be, if we look at food for example, halal chicken versus organic halal chicken. So Tayyib is that added wholesomeness, it's baked in, the values are baked in, the principles are baked in. And the title for this is the Sharia Debate, Moving from Halal to Tayyib. How does the Maqasid al-Shari'ah align with the SDGs? Maqasid al-Shari'ah, for those of you who aren't aware of the term, basically means the spirit, the intention behind the Sharia. What did the Sharia intend with having some of these rulings? And you'll often hear there's this discussion, even in finance or accounting, of substance versus form. Okay, does the substance actually reflect the form, etc.? So Maqasid is looking at the spirit of the Sharia as well as the SDGs. If I can kindly ask, starting from Dr. Mohammed Akram, to talk a little bit about the Maqasid and SDGs, just for a couple of minutes. And if I can ask everyone to speak into the microphones, please, so the voices actually travel to the back. Thank you.
Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thank you very much, Brother Omar, and my colleague, the panelists. Actually, when we talk about halal and also tayyib, I think as mentioned by Brother Omar earlier on, you see, what we want to achieve is that for us to go beyond the legality of a particular issue or a particular product. If we look into the development of Islamic finance, all this while, there is the legal part of it, meaning that you comply with all the legal or what we call as the fiqhi requirements of a particular product. And that has always been, I would say, the concern of the industry, the concern of the scholars from the very beginning, where they want to find a halal solution. A halal solution meaning that the solution which comply with the rulings that is there in Islamic finance. Now, do we stop there? No. If you ask me, I would say that we should go beyond, where we need to look into the impact of whatever that we are doing. Take for example, when Islamic banks or if we are raising sukuk or whatever, you see, if we are providing financing, then do we have to just look, the money that we raise or the kind of financing that we give is going to be used for what purpose? Is it for something which is allowable in Sharia? Or we should go beyond that. It might be allowed, but then if the impact is that it is detrimental to the society, for example, or if the company that is going to use our fund does have a child labor, let's say, or doing something which have a negative social impact. So do we go beyond that, or we just stop at the legal? If you ask me, of course, from the Sharia point of view, because these are all the ethical, social dimension of Sharia, that we have to go beyond it and try to find the solution for it. Now, actually, I was about to ask a question earlier on because of the time constraint. That is, I was asked in quite a number of forums, you see, whether these ESGs, SDGs, values and whatnot, shall it be integrated within the Sharia approval that is given by the Sharia scholars? You see, it is a challenge. We have several debates, several discussions, and there are certain companies at the moment, they do have, apart from the usual requirements, take for example in the screening of a company, whether it comply or not, the activities of the company, the financial ratio and whatnot, that is the usual screening that we are following it. But over and above that, we need to go beyond that to screen what are the social impact of the company, what are the environmental impact, and all those values that is integrated within the SDGs and also ESG and whatnot. You see, so there are certain index that have started doing this. You see, and when we are giving the Sharia approval at the moment, I would say that what we inform the industry is that, I mean, in terms of compliance, it comply, but then it is a best practice that we try to invest in a company which comply with all the values of SDGs and whatnot. I mean, personally, I've given one of the view, perhaps moving forward in the future, in providing a Sharia view, you see, I'm not ruling out the possibility of us having a kind of rating for the different approval that is being given. Take for example, you might have certain products that do comply with the Sharia, the basic compliance only, meaning that it complies with the legal requirement of Sharia. So the second level of compliance is that it complies with the legal and also ethical environment. So you can go up and up, you see, and giving the ruling as well as the Sharia pronouncement, you see, for different level. I mean, this is just a thought that I have in mind. Perhaps, I mean, we can always discuss it and we can, you know, debate whether that should be the way forward. Because from the Sharia point of view, I cannot outrightly say that something which does not comply with ESG unless, I mean, I have a clear evidence that it is really harmful, then only I can say that it does not comply with the requirement of Sharia, because there are a lot of details that need to be worked out. So I think I'll stop there, and if there is any question later on, I would be happy to address it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will definitely have questions. I've reserved some time in this session for question and answer. Dr. Marjan, a couple of minutes of opening statement from yourself.
Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. I think I would like to touch on the compatibility of SDGs with the Maqasid. What are the key differences or what are the convergence, commonalities between the two? So when we look at the central objective or central purpose of Sharia, what is called Maqasid al-Shari'ah, is actually can be summarized as facilitation of ease and removal of hardship, jalbul maslahah wa dar'ul mafsadah. So you attain what is good and then you remove what is harmful. So as Rafi mentioned in the beginning during his keynote speech, that there are 5 categories of maqasid. So preservation of religion, life, intellect, lineage, as well as wealth. So these categories, which have been proposed by Al-Ghazali back in year 505 Hijrah before. So to this end, we can say that the approach and the framework of SDGs is closely compatible with the underlying ethos of Maqasid al-Shari'ah. I mean, from the perspective of combating various forms of deprivations, be it sustenance, healthy life, good education, social status, all the 17 SDGs that have been underlined. So they are compatible and share same features, commonalities between SDGs and Maqasid. Similarly, with the conservation of sea, ocean, climate, and whatnot. What we need to emphasize is that the primary objectives of all developmental schemes that we have is to enable human community to attain minimum essentialities of life, which is necessary for the dignified survival. So, as mentioned as well in the framework of Maqasid, there are 3 levels of Maqasidic public interest or maslahah, which is necessities, needs, and luxurious. What is called daruriyat, tahsiniyat, and daruriyat, hajiyat, and tahsiniyat, according to the level. So, but the thing is it all SDGs and Maqasid are aligned? Isn't there any differences at all? So from my point of view, one should look at the original origins or the philosophical origin of SDGs and Islamic finance. When we talk about reimagining Islamic finance, so we need to look at what are the philosophical difference, the origins of SDGs and Islamic finance. I think Rafi also mentioned when our pioneers of Islamic finance started the industry back 4 decades ago, 2 elements, risk sharing and social responsibility, are key elements in driving the industry. But yet, now we are talking about SDGs, which are actually embedded within the Islamic finance itself through the Maqasid al-Shari'ah. So the origin of SDGs actually evolved because of the market failures. Market failure caused by the excessive capital accumulation and financialization. And then the elements of Maqasid al-Shari'ah is already embedded within the Islamic finance. But the question is, how does Islamic finance embrace and implement these expectations throughout since the beginning until now? In addition to that, what is lacking in SDGs and ESG is the religious elements. In other words, Sharia compliance is not part of the element of SDGs. Hence, the elements of interest, gambling, and uncertainty, which are the core prohibitions in Islamic finance, might still be there in SDGs transactions. In this regard, the Central Bank of Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia, has introduced value-based intermediation, in which the objective is actually to look into both, emphasizing on the Sharia compliance of the Islamic financial offerings, as well as looking into impact and values on the society and environment while making the profits. So I believe these are the areas where the convergence and divergence between SDGs and Maqasid al-Shari'ah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marjan. Shaykh Hytham, if I can ask you the same question, reviews on Maqasid and aligning them with the SDGs.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. I'd like to touch first upon the origin of tayyib, because this is the whole discussion started moving from halal to tayyib. And then I'll come back very quickly to your question. So from many verses in the Quran, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about tayyib, especially in Surah Al-Ma'idah, which is one of the last surahs which was revealed. So, يَسْأَلُونَكَ مَاذَا أُحِلَّ لَهُمْ. They do ask you about what is permitted for them. And then Allah replied, قُلْ أُحِلَّ لَكُمُ الطَّيِّبَاتِ. So the tayyib in plural form has been permitted for you. And this very surah, although it's well known for many of us as Surah Al-Ma'idah, Surah number 5, it's as well known for the scholars that it's Surah Al-Uqud. So it's the surah of contracts. And the contractual agreement, it's about commitment. And this is the very important point. So there's a very important link between tayyib and commitment. So Allah called this surah or started this surah, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu awfu bil uqud, O you who believe, fulfill your promises, fulfill your agreements. So it's incumbent to fulfill our agreements. And under that, straightforward, verse number 4 and number 5, he mentioned the tayyib. And the tayyib, of course, linguistically, it means an-nafi'. An-nafi', which is wholesome, beneficial, useful, and good. This is the wider meaning of tayyib. Now, I'm not going to take you through the discussion between the scholars. Is it a synonym to halal, and every halal is tayyib, and every tayyib is halal or not? We have some discussion here, but let's this for another day. The compatibility between SDGs and the Maqasid al-Shari'ah. Although we talk about the 5 Maqasid, but in fact, I'd like to go beyond this. Although these are 5 Maqasid initiated by Imam al-Ghazali, and then al-Shatibi later on elaborated on it, and then Ibn Ashur elaborated on that. And Ibn Ashur, rahimahullah, a Tunisian scholar, he mentioned that it's not just these 5, but these are the essentials of Maqasid, but it can go beyond the 5, it can go to 20, 30, not just 5. So when we go with Ibn Ashur's view, we see that yes, it is compatible with that, but I definitely agree with Dr. Marjan here. When we go to the details, we do find the devil in the details. We have in some definitions disagreement between Sharia and SDGs. So for instance, like Rafi's example, the gaming industry, and then if it's involved the child labor, then they refrain classifying this as compliant. But from Islamic point of view, it's still not non-compliant. So yes, we have some differences, as well as the political issue, which I don't want to touch upon, but here you go. When we go and define gender from Islamic point of view, let alone the political and the social definition, we have some disagreement. So it's not fully compliant with the details of the Maqasid al-Shari'ah and the Sharia in general, but nevertheless, it is more likely, let's say, more than 90% compatible.
Thank you very much, Shaykh Hytham. If I can also ask Shaykh Salman the same question, again, tackling it from the halal tayyib aspect as well as the maqasid, please.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم. I greet you with the greeting of Islam, of peace in a world of strife. I'd like to focus on 2 structural aspects. Because the SDGs introduce an interesting word to the word development, and that word is sustainable, and it's one of the few development goals that aspires to be sustainable. I'd like to focus on that point and the synergy between that and the objectives and the principles of Sharia. Now, I'd like to make the point that I don't believe that the ethics or the intentions or objectives of the Sharia are a separate or a post facto consideration to the law itself. I believe that those things are cooked in very well by God into his legal system. And so it's not possible, in my view, to be Sharia compliant without pursuing the objectives of the Creator. If it were possible to obey God's law but disobey his intention, then God would not be God, and his law would not be worth its salt. Right. So with that backdrop, what I'd like to focus on is 2 key points. There's lots of things we could focus on. The first is growth, and the second is debt. Now, within the expression sustainable development goals, we have the word development. And often we use the word development as though it's synonymous to growth. But actually, in reality, development doesn't mean you have to grow. We're all adults in this room. At some point, we all pretty much stopped growing. I stopped growing earlier than most of you, which makes me shorter, smaller. You can't tell when I'm sitting. But in our adult life, we don't expect to grow anymore. If I go home and my wife says, "Darling, you've got a growth on your nose," that's not a good thing. So not all growth is good, and yet we seem to celebrate growth just for the sake of growth. And if you look within the SDGs, there are some of those contradictions. So the SDG goal number 8 aspires towards every country, every nation, every population having a GDP growth of 3%. Now, the reality is that's just simply not sustainable, and it's not consistent with its other goal of being ecologically sustainable. So we have to really consider what does growth mean, what does development mean, and what does the Sharia expect us to do in that regard. The reality is the whole world needs to swallow a very, very bitter pill, and that's one of the big elephants in the room. When we say sustainable, what we mean is that there has to be, you see, development requires consumption. When you grow, and you grow an economy, you build things, you grow food, that requires somebody to eat that food, somebody to consume those consumables. So it requires a massive amount of consumption to consume all of that so-called development. And actually, God didn't create us, I think, according to Islam, to consume so much. And there's a lovely verse in the Quran where God criticizes those who consume too much. And he says, وَتَأْكُلُونَ التُّرَاثَ أَكْلَ اللَّمَّ, and you consume your legacy. The word used here is actually legacy. The word turath, it's a slightly unusual word in that context. You might wonder why that word is used. We consume our legacy without right, i.e. we consume other people's share. That's what it means, to consume other people's share. So particularly in the richer developed nations, for want of a better expression, we need to swallow that bitter pill that we have to reduce our per capita consumption. That's the reality. And we can't simply blame poor countries for having too many people. We've got to realize that the richer part of the world consume far too much and far more than their true share. So I think one of the objectives of Sharia is for us to develop, not necessarily to grow, and not to develop to death. The second point I'd like to make is, again, a structural point, because we can talk about ethics, and these development goals are aspirations. They're not enshrined in law. You might say they're sort of tertiary ethics. But Islamic law contains within it primary and secondary rules. And those ethics are, as I said, baked into those rules. The second structural point I'd like to make is debt. And debt is the big elephant in the room, including in the Islamic finance room. Because most of Islamic finance out there simply creates more and more debt. Now, does that pursue the intention of the Creator? Now, if you look at the principles and rules of Sharia and the prohibition of a debt-based, interest-based economy, an interest-based debt economy, I should say, the objective behind that is to promote real economy, because the principle in Sharia is al-kharaju bil-daman or al-ghunmu bil-ghurm, that the people with money should not be able to earn money simply because they've got money to start with. They need to engage and assume and be subject to all of those risks, natural risks, commercial risks out there. Whereas if I lend somebody money, he takes those risks and I only take a credit risk. That creates structurally an artificial economy. So in Islamic finance, the big problem is how do we promote risk-reward sharing-based economies within Muslim and non-Muslim communities. It's not just a Muslim problem. This is a problem throughout the world. I'd like to finish off by quoting some research done by Baker Tilly in the UK for Step Change, the debt charity. And they said that the problem debt in the UK, the total cost of it, so we often ask, what's the cost of achieving the SDGs? But we should ask ourselves, what's the cost to the earth and to society and to our legacy of not achieving them? What's the cost of carrying on the way we are? And the cost of problem debt in the UK is £8.3 billion. And we all pay for that because taxpayers' money goes to pay for the mental health problems that people face because of debt. I was listening to Radio 4 the other day, and there was a young lady, a student, who went out to buy a car, a small runner, to run around and do the shopping. She went into a dealer. The dealer sold her a brand new car worth more than £20,000, which she simply couldn't afford. She fell into arrears and she became stressed. She went to hospital. Her mother was in distress. Who pays for the cost of that? If people lose their jobs because of debt and they go into benefits, who pays for that? We pay for that, the taxpayer. The total cost, the biggest cost of debt in the UK, biggest single cost of debt, which is 2.8, I'm going to finish with this, £2.8 billion, is the cost of losing a home or being evicted for not being able to pay the mortgage. And of course that has knock-on costs in terms of health, mental health, suicide, breakdown of relationships, breakdown of marriage, children in broken down homes, and so on. This is the cost of debt. No wonder God in the Quran declares war on interest. It's the only thing He declares war on. He doesn't declare war on highway robbers or rapists or warmongers. All those things are bad things. He declares war on people who consume interest. So I complained about this for about 10 years, and then I thought I need to do something about it. So me and a few colleagues, we set up a brand new institution which will provide debt-free home finance. Imagine that. You can buy your home, pay for it for over 20, 30 years, pay approximately what you pay elsewhere, but never be in debt. This is why the Sharia was sent down to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to free people from the bondage of debt. وَجَزَاكُمُ khairan. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for that, Shaykh Salman. I guess it's kind of throwing the cat amongst the pigeons, really, mashallah. But it's we'll continue with some of the questions we had beforehand, and then we'll have questions from the audience. Okay, so where should I begin? I'll ask Dr. Marjan this actually. Do Sharia scholars do enough to promote social purpose?
Well, it is a very tricky question because as Mr. Salman mentioned, and we also keep mentioning that the compliance and the intention and the substance of Sharia, it should be hand in hand. It should not be detached from one to another. But the thing is, I think what happened now, because as Rafi, I really like the analogy of using different chord for playing different game. So with the current fractional reserve system and with the conventional system being exists hand in hand with Islamic finance, that's where the tricky part comes into the picture. So in terms of coming back to Omar's question, to what extent or what have Sharia scholars done in order to make sure that the industry is moved from halal to halal and tayyiba? So in this case, I think I must admit that currently, even Prof. Akram also mentioned, currently the sentiment is very much looking into legal compliance. We are not there to look into the impact of the financing. Take, for example, in any product approval process at the bank level, me as a Sharia advisor at one of the biggest Islamic bank in Malaysia, Maybank Islamic, when the product people come for approval during the Sharia meeting, what they come is looking into the legality of the product. What type of contract that the product will use, what are the requirements needed, and then without looking into asking into further details, who will be receiving this financing? What would be the purpose of this financing apart from being Sharia compliant? Yes, it is a must that the Sharia compliant of the purpose of the financing is a must, but what type of financing, whether it will involve destruction of the environment, whether it will be used for other purpose, which is still to say that it is truly haram, as Prof. Akram mentioned just now, it is the details in the devil that we need to look into, we need to deliberate, but mostly what has been presented to the Sharia committee at the product approval level is very much on the compliance. So in this regard, I believe Sharia committee, Sharia advisors should play greater role in terms of embracing and implementing the other aspects of Islamic finance, which is values and impact, in which they should be more involved, they should be asking more, who would be the recipient of this financing? What would be the type of financing that is going to be used? And then in terms of influencing the board of directors of the bank, communication, interaction with the board of directors, so that the board of directors are fully aware that Sharia does not confine into legal compliance only, but go beyond that. In addition to that, there should be further education in terms of educating the investors. So these should be part and parcel of the future role of Sharia committee, I believe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marjan. Someone asked a question now. Look, we've had this discussion about Islamic finance playing under a different set of circumstances, and generally the discussion for the last 10 to 20 years at least in Islamic finance has always been, look, we understand and we appreciate it's not 100%, for want of a better term, Islamic, but under the circumstances in which we're operating, it's the best we're going to do. Now there's a principle in Islam, Islamic jurisprudence, which is called Sadd al-Dara'i, which means to close the door to harms. Closing the door. So this means that something that will lead to a harm should be closed. With the Islamic structures that we've had, if we haven't achieved the outcomes and we're finding people in record levels of debt in Muslim majority countries, in economies where Islamic finance is flourishing, instead of discussing the possible benefits and things being tayyib, shouldn't our priority be to reduce those harms, Dr. Akram?
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Of course, I mean, preventing harm is part of the overall Maqasid al-Shari'ah, Jalbul Masalih wa Darul Mafasid, meaning that to attain benefit and also to prevent any kind of harm. And I'm glad that you mentioned about this issue regarding Saddu Zara'i. Now, even if you look into the Quran, you see when the Quran mentioned about the prohibition of gambling and also consumption of liquor, you see, I mean, the beautiful ayah in the Quran mentioned that يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ قُلْ فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ وَإِثْمُهُمَا أَكْبَرُ مِنْ نَفْعِهِمَا. For me, this is a great kind of principle that is there in the Quran, in which when the Prophet was asked, okay, about the consumption of liquor and also gambling, and the Quran says, tell them that in both of this action, you see, there are فِيهِمَا إِثْمٌ كَبِيرٌ وَمَنَافِعُ لِلنَّاسِ. I mean, there are great harm in it, you see, but however, there are some benefit in it, right? But the harm is much more than the benefit. So whenever there is anything in which the harmful effect of it is greater than the benefit of it, I mean, here where the Sharia gives the indication that it is prohibited. Okay, so similarly, when we talk about financial product, okay, if there is any financial product in which, I mean, the harm is greater than the benefit, then it can be categorized as something which is prohibited. Now, the challenge is that how do you define, all right, whether it is harmful or it is not? Take, for example, we always talk about this debt-based product in Islamic finance. Nowadays, I think we can conveniently say that 80-90% of the product that is in the market across the globe is a debt-based market. Okay, and our friend, economists usually, they say that this is harmful to the economy, right? And what is needed is that an absolute kind of evidence indicating or showing that it is really harmful. Okay, so I think here is the dilemma that we, the Sharia scholars, is in which whenever we wanted to decide whether it is prohibited or not, we need an absolute evidence. And this absolute evidence, of course, we need to get the information from the others. of course, I believe that not all or not many Sharia scholars have the capability to analyze things or have the data that is needed to analyze things and say that yes, I mean it is absolutely harmful. So the ruling is that it is prohibited from the Sharia point of view. So here I strongly believe that when it comes to Saddu Zari'ah, I mean this issue of trying to ascertain whether to what extent it is harm or not, the Sharia scholars, the economists, as well as the market practitioners have to come together and I mean try to find the solution together. So, I mean some people will say that, well, I mean this is not within the domain of the Sharia advisor, but it is within the domain of the regulator. I mean that is another point of view, because the regulator is supposed to monitor. You see, if a particular, take for example, credit card, right? As a Sharia scholars, I mean there are different ways and means. You see, different underlying contract that can be used to devise a credit card. But then there will be certain impact. You see, I mean you are creating a debt-ridden society. Take for example in Malaysia, you see about 40% of the people who are declared bankrupt, especially among the youth, you see they are declared bankrupt because of the debt of credit card. You see, so this is the kind of data that is needed in order for us to go further to say that yes, I can approve you to have this credit card, but this is the condition 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You see, otherwise, I mean they will be. I mean it is not going to be approved. You see, so for me, it is a collective effort that needs to be done by everyone. You see, in order for us to go to another level.
Is the shortcoming then with society and general Islamic scholarship in moving society away from instant gratification, buying things now with debt? Because ultimately, the Islamic finance scholars have been facilitating that type of movement. So is it for them to make a stand, or is it for other scholars and leaders within society to say, actually, the way society is going, we need to change it, if that makes sense?
For me, it is not only related to the ruling or to the fatwa that is given by the scholar, but there are other dimensions. I mean, the education. I mean, the financial management. You see, I mean, to what extent, let's say, the education system, you see, is catering for people to manage their financing, right? Do we have enough items that is embedded in our national curriculum, for example, you see, to teach our children how to manage financing? I mean, come into the picture. So, facilitating is one of the aspects, because of course, I mean there are many people out there. They are using the products that is available, you see, in a very disciplined manner, so they can always you see success, and there are people who abuse sometimes, you see, or misuse the system and whatnot. So it is, for me, I mean we need to look from the holistic perspective.
Thank you very much. Shaykh Hytham, a question for yourself. Is it right to hold Islamic finance by a higher standard than conventional finance, and does it impact competitiveness? Again, looking at access to markets, access to finance, we're talking about uplifting communities, etc., is now imposing compliance with SDGs or any of these other initiatives. Is that going to hamper Islamic banking and then ultimately impact the community?
Bismillah. Let me just answer your question in two ways. The first one is about we as Muslims being asked by God to do the best all the time. The best are those who are best in their conduct and character. So transactions and principles are on the top of the list. So this is one thing. Yes and no at the same time. Yes, we are longing to have more high standards in Islamic banks. This is from theoretical point of view. But I do not like to live in the ideal world. I like to live in the reality. We aspire, we look forward to have this, but we need to be realistic and see what's on the ground rather than just talking about idealism. What I mean by this, that the shift which we are after now from halal to tayyib, we need to have a different shift as well, from profit to purpose, which is not easy. I'm telling you from my experience, and for all practitioners as well, they will share the same experience with me. It's not easy because whatever we say, as Sharia scholars, as practitioners, as CEOs, you name it, directors and what have you, it will not be implemented on the floor unless you have the acceptance of the shareholders in the first place. They are the owners of the business. We definitely encourage, we promote, we do our best to put this forward. But to be honest with you, nothing can happen on the ground until two things happen. One is the implementation by the government itself, like what happened in Malaysia, for instance. It's a rule now. Then everyone should abide, like what happened in Bahrain, for instance. The IOFI standard is incumbent on Islamic banks, then no one can play games with that. So until the government makes it incumbent, we as Sharia scholars, we cannot make this as incumbent on banks. But nevertheless, we try our best. We promote. But we need to bring the right people under one roof. We are now just talking theories, with my respect to everyone here. You need to bring the decision makers here to convince them about the importance of moving from profit to purpose. Unless we do that, it's just airy-fairy stuff, with my respect. It will not be implemented. It's just wishful thinking. So if you want real execution, you need to bring the decision makers and the practitioners and the scholars under one roof and have real discussion to convince those who are in charge to do what is best. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just aware of the time, so I want to give everyone an opportunity for some questions to the scholars before we have concluding remarks from everyone. Are there any questions from the audience? Mushtaq?
Thank you. That's it. Thank you. I'm glad, Shaykh Hytham, you ended with that, profit or purpose. Is it possible to have profit with purpose in terms of financial services, Islamic financial services?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And also, I'm interested in this.
Just not, rather than being dominated by profit. This is what I
sure.
meant. That the driver is the profit and profit.
Yeah.
Okay, you have profit, but you have to have purpose as well.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification. I'm interested in the transformative role of Sharia scholars, especially when they sit on boards. And I think all of you sit on boards of banks or companies or whatever. Transformative role, I mean, especially what you have been discussing in terms of this moving from halal to tayyib and that. To what extent does that transformative role being pushed by Sharia scholars? Because I despair when I see a prospectus telling me that if you are an investor, we cannot guarantee that this is a Sharia compliant sukuk or transaction. You have to consult your own Sharia scholar. So I wonder what the Sharia scholar of that particular transaction, what sort of advice they gave. Whether they're just passive there to rubber stamp or, I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but I want to know how your thought processes.
No, let me interrupt you. Sorry, Mushtaq.
Yeah.
I like what you said, but let me interrupt you, please. This is for legal purposes. This is very close, and Salman can agree or disagree with me. This is for legal purposes. Only this clause is for legal purposes. It has nothing to do with the Sharia scholar. But just it's sort of protection.
No, but the general public,
Yes?
the investors
This
read
is
the-
why
the
they have
prospect.
invented this clause, if you
Yeah.
want.
No, but as I said, the general public, investors, the analysts, they read this. And they're not stupid.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So how do you bridge that gap? Also, I just got a email from the World Islamic Economic Forum, a workshop on this latest craze about fintech and all the various applications. And one of the applications said it would be beneficial to is sports betting. So there seems to be a disconnect of what's being talked about, what's been developed, and the terminology and the articulation of where we go to the next step of Islamic finance. So I'd like to see what you as Sharia scholars think, what you can do better in terms of this transforming, this whole debate from, if you like, Sharia compliant to tayyib, by putting more pressure. As you said, we need to engage more, discuss more with the stakeholders. And notwithstanding what you said about the legality aspect. Thank you.
Actually, Brother Mushtaq, you see, what you're referring to is a statement in the prospectus. Right? You have to understand that the statement in the prospectus usually is a general statement. Okay, but then that will be subjected to what is there in the contract. Usually, in the contract, there will be the reference to the Sharia pronouncement, which is being made for a particular product, whether it is sukuk or whatever product it is. Then there is a reference. So there, the responsibility of the Sharia scholars will come. You see, whenever they sign off, you see, then that is their responsibility, and their statement to state that this particular product has been examined and it complies with the requirement of Sharia, and that has to be taken into consideration as well. That is one. The other thing is that I think even now, if you look, the trend sometimes is that sometimes in the market we can see that there is tendency to make, the Sharia as scapegoat. You see, the Dana gas issue and whatnot, right? You see, when they couldn't pay the investors, then Sharia become the scapegoat. You see, taking into account there might be certain different interpretation of Sharia, even though in this particular case, you see, there was no difference during the inception of the sukuk. There were these differences, but nobody talked about it. But then later on, when there is problem, then this kind of issue is brought up. The other thing that I would like to, when it comes to, I'm not defending, but then what I'm saying is that sometimes the Sharia scholars, they are also restricted with the mandate. Okay, in the appointment letter and in the term of reference of the appointment and whatnot, even though personally I would say that this needs to be reviewed. Okay, so we need to include the role of the Sharia scholar not only to examine the legal requirement of a particular product, but go beyond that to examine the impact of the particular product. You see, that is one. The other thing is that awareness. I believe that at this juncture, we really need to do more, much more, in order to get the awareness among the scholars about their role, that their role should not be confined, you see, to looking at the legal aspect of it, but to go beyond, to look into the impact, because not many understand what SDG is, what ESG and whatnot. I think not many are being exposed to all these kind of issues. So awareness is also another key aspect that we really need to look into it. Allahu A'lam.
Thank you very much, Akram. Any other questions from the floor? Yes, please. Can you say your name?
Bismillah. My name is Hassan. I am a student of MSc Finance and Risk, and as well as Diploma in Finance, Islamic Finance. Recently, I graduated from University of East London. Okay, my issue is because now the last speaker talked about the awareness. What I realized in the Islamic finance industry, I saw there is very limited information. Even you couldn't get books. It's not available that much when you compare to the conventional finance. It's not as such to get easily the books, any other research literatures and other things. Therefore, as brother mentioned, one of the brother mentioned there, one of the related to the corporate social responsibility, Allah said in Quran, chapter 5, verse 1, it says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, O you believers, you have to fulfill the obligation, fulfill your obligation. This is the main thing. And also, it is from the primary source of law, what says from Quran, Surah Al-Baqarah, number 275, it says, Allah Azza wa Jal permitted trade, but forbidden usury or interest. That is the core issue, and we should have to rely everything revolving on this matter. Therefore, my question is regarding to the capital accumulation versus the wealth distribution. That is the core. Most of the Islamic economists believe that instead of capital accumulation, we should have to work more on wealth distribution. Then, can you comment on this matter, please?
I think what you've said is absolutely germane to the discussion, because those two core principles are structural, they're embedded in the legal system. And that's what I said at the beginning, that Islamic law is not so flea-bitten that its intention can be circumvented by implementing the law itself. That would be a law that simply doesn't work. Now, going back to the point of the role of Sharia scholars, I totally concur with the other members of the panel that it is most certainly the role of Sharia scholars to look beyond simply the pieces of paper that are put before them in a Sharia board meeting. I had one experience in Qatar, and I wasn't on the Sharia board, but I was working with a company intending to do a joint venture with a big Qatari real estate developer. And on the way to their offices, we saw one of their buses transporting their laborers, their workers, and the bus had no air conditioning. And so because it would become so hot inside the bus, they took out the windows. So literally they were transporting their laborers in almost 50-degree temperatures in metal canisters with no windows, effectively. And this is common. So when we got there, we thought, well, should we bring this up? Because you think, well, will they be offended? But at the end of the day, we have a responsibility. At the end, we have to, if we see something wrong and we can't physically change it with our hands, we have to speak about it with our tongues. So we brought it up, and one of the sons, it's a family business, one of the sons was in the room. He burst into tears. As soon as we said it, he burst into tears. The next time we met him, a couple of weeks later, he said, "Come with me, I want to show you something." And he took us around the back, and there were 5 spanking brand new air-conditioned buses. He said, "We've got rid of the old ones, and we now have these ones." Now that sort of thing doesn't get given to. They don't declare to you that we transport our workers in metal in tin cans. Is that Sharia compliant? They're not going to ask you that question. So the Sharia scholar simply doesn't answer the question they're asked. They need to probe and ask about the total impact of that business on their employees, on society, what they do, what safety regulations they have on the building sites. How many people fall and injure themselves and die on the building sites? That's a Sharia compliance question as far as I'm concerned. The other point I'd like to make is about the education, about educating entrepreneurs, educating especially young people, because they're the entrepreneurs of the future, about what their responsibilities are in not only being Sharia compliant, but as moral citizens. And that's really important. It's really important that education is independent, because I'll give you a small example. I had a friend who was a manager at Centrepoint, the homeless charity, and they work a lot with homeless people. They have a lot of homeless people in hostels. And he was organizing a course for them on how to manage their finances. And the whole course was about how to get a credit card and how to be in debt responsibly. That was the theme. So he said to his manager that before we do that, shouldn't we first try to get them to budget and manage themselves without getting into debt? How to budget and be financially independent? And he said, no, we can't do that because this is sponsored by one of the big banks. So independent education is immensely important. And so when you have information, this comes back to the point about information. When information is channeled through vested interests who are interested in promoting a certain type of economy, you're not going to have independent, open education for the next generation. And so the role of Sharia scholars should be to open that up. And what I find with Islamic finance education today is it's all about Islamic finance. There's very little about the fundamental principles of Sharia and Islamic economy as a whole.
Yep.
It's become very pigeonholed.
Thank you very much. And if you can include your concluding comment with that as well, then please, Dr. Marjan. Thank you.
Just to make a remark, in terms of your question regarding resources for Islamic finance. Actually, at ISRA, we are now developing, we have developed what we call Islamic finance repository, knowledge repository, what we call IFIKIR, where we have, a lot of resources on Islamic finance, ranging from the translation of Arabic fatwa into English, and then all the publications that ISRA has already published, and then other articles related to Islamic finance. And then we are now collaborating with other organizations like the standard setters, for example, to have all their regulations and standards to be part on our repository. So you can go to our website, isra.my, and you can click on ifikir.my. So you will find lots of resources on Islamic finance. As a concluding remark, I would say that it might be costly for us to go back, to implement halal and tayyiban in the context of Islamic finance. But similar to what Umer mentioned in terms of organic food, although it is costly, but the consequential effect is tremendous and appealing. You don't have to spend your money on medical expenses, but you can use that money for other social purposes. So in the case of Islamic finance, once you move into halal and tayyib, you will be getting greater impact in the future. And then I believe I would like to mention that Martin Luther King Jr. once in his speech said that I have a dream. So I believe it is I believe that it is our dream today to see Islamic finance to go to basics, not just halal, but halal and tayyiban in a very near future. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Shaykh Hytham, if I can ask for a concluding comment from yourself, please. You have a minute.
Yes. The bottom line, if you want to change the status quo, actually, we need to change the input to get a different output. As simple as that. And going forward, we need to change mentality in the industry and those who are in charge in order to make a difference. Otherwise, all these voices it's a waste of time. So we need to raise more awareness, more education, not only to the public and the scholars and the imams, but as well, more importantly, to the investors, to the shareholders, to the stakeholders. This is where the efforts should be spent more, rather than doing more efforts on the public sphere or public awareness, which is needed. But in order to make a difference and a change, we need to tackle the gap between the scholars and the shareholders or the stakeholders in that regard. So unless we do that, I cannot see a quick change. I cannot see change coming into place in the near future.
Thank you. Shaykh Salman, is anything, any concluding marks from yourself?
Yes, just finally, we ask for evidence of the harm. I'm going to go back to this point of debt because it's close to my heart. The evidence of harm. It's no coincidence that the greatest deforesting countries that are cutting down the rainforests and cutting the lungs of the earth, those countries are also the countries that are historically most in national debt. So why do they destroy the environment? Because they're between a rock and a hard place. They're in debt. And when you put people into desperate debt situations, you get all sorts of harms to the environment, to society, breakdown of families, children brought up in broken families, and so on. We really need to address this problem. And there's a raison d'etre problem or question for Islamic finance, which is, are we truly serving the intention of God and the reason why he sent the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to the earth with the noble Sharia, if 80 to 90% of Islamic finance is debt-based?
Thank you.
Just briefly, I think in looking into this subject, I would like to urge all of us to look beyond banking, where we have the Waqaf institution, we have the Zakah institution. Of course, I mean, to integrate all these SDGs, ESGs and whatnot, I mean, there is cost associated to it. In one of the research, I think in 2018, it was mentioned that around $1 trillion is required every year to achieve SDG alone. So, I mean, there is cost associated to it. So we really need to look beyond banking, how bank can play their role also in the other institution of Islam, Waqaf, Zakah, Sadaqah and whatnot. And I have seen some of the institutions, they are doing it at the moment. You see, so perhaps, I mean, this is one of the avenues that we really need to go into it and try to explore it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to all of our panel there